Chicago. And that's what a lot of people don't know. A lot of people don't remember. Chicago in the mid-2000s had its lowest crime rate in history. And not just them, New York City, LA, there was so many cities around the country that had historically low crime rates. Now the media didn't cover it, which is our next story coming up. But the media didn't cover it, and because of that, the public never really knew that crime was going down.
Uh-huh.
But Chicago had record low crime until about 5 or 6 years ago. And they completely messed that up when they destroyed the neighborhoods and closed all the schools as well. That's another thing that Rahm Emanuel did, actually. Rahm Emanuel closed all the schools and, again, forced people from rival neighborhoods and rival communities to go together. And so these drug wars that was started in the 70s and 80s with cocaine and then crack in the 80s and the 90s have now spiraled for 3 or 4 generations when what we should have done back in the 70s and 80s was focus on the quality of life issues. If we had focused on the quality of life issues, education, better living environments, for people who do have a drug problem, rehab, you wouldn't have had these criminal organizations controlling whole neighborhoods full of people, bro.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very sad.
Yeah, I mean, when I was growing up, there were gangs.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna say there weren't gangs, but the notion of them, controlling entire neighborhoods or fighting for neighborhood territories, no, it wasn't like that then.
Right.
And I guess there was no economic reason for it to be like that then. It was crack that made that real estate profitable.
Right.
That made controlling those corners profitable.
Right. Absolutely. But it is important to state, and I thought this story was important because this is definitely I want to get to this last story before we get into the critical race theory and why our Attorney General Todd Rokita has taken it upon himself to try to decide what children should be learning in schools. I wanted to get to this last story because I've been in countless arguments over the last 15 years, 10 years especially, with people. And it's because it's one of the major reoccurring things we have on this show, which is that the media exists as a profit-making entity. That's what it does. It's not there to inform the public. It is there to make money. And to me, the failure of the media is in full display in this story. Over half of Americans think that violent crime is higher today than it was in the 1990s. And let me give you a spoiler, folks. It's not. So a clear majority of Americans believe that there is more violent crime in the U.S. today than in the 1990s, even though the violent crime rate is much lower than it was 30 years ago. Now, let me say that again. The violent crime rate is much lower than it was 30 years ago.
And 30 years ago would be
1991.
1991.
Yes, the height of the crack era. Now, the common misconception doesn't come out of nowhere. The U.S. homicides did raise 25% between 2019 and 2020. As we talked about, since you've been here, especially, violence has gone up in the last year or so. The largest single year increase since tracking began in the 1960s, since the early 60s. And 2020 has seen a small uptick due to gun violence. But as disturbing as it is, America's pandemic era murder spike has not yet lifted the overall violent crime rate to anything approaching the early 1990s peak, or even the level that it fell to by the end of the 1990s. Yes, the survey found that only a few Americans, just 14%, realize that violent crime remains lower today than in the 1990s. And while Republicans are more likely to incline to believe that violent crime is higher today, hold on, caller. I'll get to you after this. Republicans are more inclined to believe that violent crime is higher today than the Democrats are. The higher outnumbers the lowers by wide margins across the political spectrum. Now, this is a part. Oh, okay. The caller hung up. But this is a part of a worldwide thing, Rev. As I've been studying this for a few years now, crime has gone down in every Western countries over the past 25 years. They call it the Great Western Crime Drop. So that's Canada, England, France, Germany, Japan. Virtually every rich country has seen its crime rates plummet since the early 1990s. Isn't that something?
Yeah. You would think that that's a good thing.
I mean, it is.
Something to celebrate.
Me personally, I think it's technology. I do think now suicides have gone up dramatically in this country over that same period, and we're seeing kind of depression. The sort of internet age has isolated people. But I think because the internet age has isolated people, they're not actually killing each other. So,
right.
But they may be killing themselves with drugs and, with other tools that people who are depressed and suicidal often engage in to, essentially express their level of discontent with society. But the one thing that has gone up is mass shootings. Mass shootings. Isn't that something? So while less people get killed overall, less people are likely to be victims of violent crime. If you are a victim of a violent crime, it will be much more likely to be of a mass shooting, the types that we saw in Columbine, and seemingly what we see every week now in this country. And that is so. It's just sort of crazy to me how we in this country we pick a poison, and we sort of pick our poison and sort of allow it to kill us for a while, and then we overreact and then go in the opposite direction. And in the process of trying to fix the one issue that we have, we go in the opposite direction. It's very interesting to me how that works. And so, but to go back to the original point, the media's job is to keep you living in fear. Yeah. That's what they do. If it bleeds, it leads. It reminds me of that movie I watched from the 70s a few years ago called Network. Have you ever seen Network?
I think so.
I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore.
Yep.
Yes, I watched it. I love that movie. I just saw it about 4 or 5 years ago, and I watched it like 2 or 3 times. I couldn't get enough of it. And it was talking about back in the 1970s how even then they had started with the sort of if it bleeds, it leads mentality. And that's what the media does. They'll tell you all every day about how many people got killed in Chicago last week. And it's sad. It is unacceptable. We still have a much higher crime rate than the rest of the Western world, the rich countries of the world in terms of homicides. But even when crime goes down, the media does not cover it, which I think in some ways encourages more bad behavior, encourages more people to, or at least discourages people from not committing crime. I think we should have celebrated the fact that crime is going down. I've been saying that for years. We should have had, if we were going to have parades, they should have had parades in Chicago. When Chicago had record low murder rates, they should have celebrated it.
Yeah. I mean, if for no other reason, so that the people in those affected neighborhoods would have some feeling that things are getting better.
Yeah.
I don't know what the economic situation of the South Side of Chicago is, how that affects the bottom dollar in the city of Chicago in terms of, their tax revenue and such. But it sure seems like they are allowing a portion of their city to be negatively publicized.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know from what happens in this city when we allow it to be negatively publicized, it affects our bottom line.
Yeah, it does.
And so, we complain about people negatively, putting out negative publicity about the city of Gary, making the city of Gary look bad. We complain about that because we see the impact. And I would think that Chicago would have a much bigger stick will to prevent that sort of thing than we seem to have in Gary. So why do they allow a portion of their city to be cast as a war zone?
I have no idea.
What is
no
the
idea.
I'm wondering, is there potential redevelopment happening, or that could be happening on the south side if they could just get those folk out of there?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. You drive down the property value.
Yeah, that's what they did here.
Right. That's true to an extent too. And we talked about it last week. Who's buying up all this property here? Chicago people. Mm-hmm. So they're all running here with their problems.
Outsiders.
Yes. We have to go to another break. When we come back, folks, we're going to get to critical race theory. Why is it everywhere? Who's responsible for this?
And what is it?
What is it about? What is it about? We'll be right back. Please give us a call on WLTH. You are listening to Scott and the Rev on WLTH 1370 AM. Give us a call, 219-885-1371.